Let's be clear about what had just been scanned. Tel al-Warka is not a minor site. It is Uruk, the world's first true city, the place where writing was invented, where kingship was first recorded, where the walls described in the world's oldest written story were actually built. And beneath it, the radar was showing something that flood sediment was supposed to have erased centuries ago. Then the results came back. The standard account of Gilgamesh has always held a careful distance from the physical world. The epic, the oldest narrative humanity has ever written down, compiled around 2100 BCE and preserved in its most complete form on 12 clay tablets from around 1200 BCE, describing who built the walls of Uruk, who journeyed to the ends of the earth in search of immortality, and who failed to find it. Scholars have long treated this as literary record rather than literal history, possibly based on a real early dynastic king, probably mythologized far beyond any historical core, and almost certainly not recoverable as an archaeological object. No confirmed tomb, no skeletal remains, no burial inscription. The consensus position was cautious, reasonable, and grounded in the absence of evidence. But what happens when the physical evidence refuses to cooperate with the careful language? The DNA profile recovered from the sealed Warka complex doesn't match what the model predicts. The haplogroup signal aligns not with the established Sumerian-era population of southern Mesopotamia, but with a northerly migration corridor, a population movement associated with earlier demographic patterns that the standard Bronze Age framework does not expect to find in an elite burial context at Uruk, at that depth, at that date. The radiocarbon chronology places the organic material in the right window for an early dynastic royal burial. The architecture, according to the remote sensing data, is consistent with a deliberately sealed, non-functional enclosed structure. None of those three things, on their own, would be enough to make a serious claim. Together, they are harder to set aside. This is not just an archaeological question. If Gilgamesh was real, if the world's first named hero had a burial site, a physical location, an addressable place in the sediment, then what exactly was lost when Mesopotamia was flooded, excavated under colonial conditions, and torn apart by a century of political upheaval? Which stories did we not get to keep? The anomaly at Warka forces that question into the open. And the question doesn't go away when you lower your confidence interval. It repeated. The survey that found the complex was conducted in a narrow operational window. The German Archaeological Institute team had been working with Iraqi counterparts to exploit unusually low water levels in the seasonal floodplain, using a combination of remote sensing, ground-penetrating radar, and targeted surface recovery. The buried channel structure appeared in early 2003. The sealed complex signature was confirmed in the weeks that followed. Organic material, bone, and dental fragments was recovered before full site access became impossible. Then the war started. The Iraq invasion of March 2003 ended the excavation before the complex could be mapped in full. Looting struck dozens of Iraqi sites in the weeks that followed. Tel al-Warka was not immune. The samples that had already been extracted went into storage and processing pipelines that would take years to work through, and the institutional context that had made the survey possible collapsed almost immediately. What the team had managed to pull from the ground in those weeks would take years to fully process, and longer still to publish. The raw numbers, where they exist in preliminary and referenced form, are not easy to explain away. The radiocarbon dates on associated organic material fall within a range consistent with the early dynastic period, the same era in which a historical figure behind the Gilgamesh legend, if one existed, would have been active. The sediment layer analysis places the complex below a recognized flood horizon, consistent with deliberate sealed burial rather than gradual sedimentation. And the ADNA haplogroup classification, the element that creates the most interpretive pressure, does not resolve to the local Ubaid to early dynastic population continuum that characterizes the surrounding Uruk remains. It comes from somewhere else, or somewhere earlier, or both. Pause here. because this is where most coverage stops, and where the actual question begins. The contamination explanation is the first and most legitimate objection, and it has to be taken seriously. A flood-affected site with centuries of sediment disturbance is exactly the kind of T-text where ancient DNA can be compromised. A haplogroup signal from a flood layer could reflect intrusion from a later population just as easily as it could reflect an anomalous original burial. That's a real methodological problem, and it hasn't been resolved in the published record because the full data set hasn't been published. But contamination, if present, would be expected to produce noise. It would not be expected to produce a consistent signal that aligns cleanly with a specific migration corridor. A consistent, coherent haplogroup profile is not what contamination looks like, which is precisely why the result is difficult to dismiss with a single phrase. 3 separate methods, 3 separate anomalies, all pointing in the same direction. And yet, nobody wanted to say it out loud. Here is the detail that changes the shape of everything that came before it. The Epic of Gilgamesh does not simply describe a king, it describes a burial. In one of its most specific passages, the text records that after Gilgamesh's death, the people of Uruk diverted the Euphrates River over his tomb, that he was buried beneath the river itself, sealed in a chamber under the water, protected by the diverted channel. For most of the 20th century, that passage was treated as literary flourish, royal hyperbole, mythological grandeur, not a description of an actual engineering project. The remote sensing data at Tel al-Warka shows a sealed complex beneath a former Euphrates channel. The oldest story in the world may have been a map all along. And the Warka complex is not isolated. Comparable subsurface burial signatures have been reported at 2 other sites in the broader Uruk region, identified through similar remote sensing surveys in the years since 2003. The ADNA haplogroup profile that appears in the Warka material has also appeared in separately published ancient genomic studies. An early dynastic period remains further north along the Tigris corridor, in contexts that current migration models struggle to account for. Warka, Tel Ukair, the early dynastic cemeteries of the northern alluvial zone. The signal keeps appearing in places it shouldn't. This was no longer a Uruk problem. This was a Mesopotamia problem. In 1982, a sponge diver off the coast of Uluburun, Turkey, found the wreck of a late Bronze Age ship carrying a cargo that rewrote what historians thought that they knew about ancient trade. Homeric-era exchange networks, previously treated as semi-legendary, turned out to be traceable in metal ingots, ivory, and glass. The physical evidence didn't prove Homer was literal, but it proved that dismissed Bronze Age sources sometimes carry accurate geographic and material memory. That the line between mythology and technical record is not always where scholars drew it. The Uluburun revision didn't come from a fringe theory. It came from an inconvenient hull on a seafloor. We've been wrong about the Bronze Age before. The question is, how wrong? String Tel al-Warka today is one of the least excavated major sites in Mesopotamia, which is an almost incomprehensible fact given what it is. The subsurface complex identified in 2003 has never been fully mapped. The water table in the region has risen due to upstream damming on the Euphrates, and seasonal flooding has increased. UNESCO monitoring reports document accelerating degradation at the site. The sealed layers that produced anomalous signals 20 years ago are under more water now than they were then, and less accessible, and more compromised with every passing season. The chambers are still there, for now. The water is rising. The ADNA dataset from the Warka complex has been referenced in conference presentations, in preliminary survey reports, in a small number of academic citations that gesture toward a larger study without producing one. The full peer-reviewed publication of the complete findings has not appeared in the public record. The data exists or existed in whatever institutional archive received it after 2003. Its implications, if the preliminary signal holds under full analysis, would require a significant revision of early Mesopotamian demographic history. That is not a small publication. That is not a straightforward peer review process. And it is possible, not sure, not provable but possible, that the data set remains unpublished because no one has yet agreed on what publishing it would mean. If this is the kind of history that doesn't make it into textbooks, this channel is where it lives. Subscribe, and you'll see it when it surfaces. The chambers are sealed, the data is sealed, and somewhere beneath the oldest city in the world, something is still waiting to be read. We don't know what's in those chambers.